Hold the front page, how street newspapers have helped hundreds of thousands of homeless people. And find out why parts of your body could be the answer to keeping your money safe from digital bank robbers. I'm Martin Stanford. This is Inside. Welcome to Inside. There are many different approaches to tackling homelessness around the world, but one that's taken off in the past 20 years is the so-called street newspaper. What started in New York now happens in 35 countries, with thousands of men and women selling papers as a way to work themselves out of poverty. Insight Sarah Firth reports.
Big issue, folks. Big issue, sir.
A hand up, not a hand out. The tagline of the magazine, whose aim it's been to keep homeless people off the streets.
It helps the people that are on the street. It helps them get finances to keep themselves going. They don't need to sit on a street corner begging. Because you're not begging, you're actually trying to make something of yourself.
John Bird was first homeless at the age of 5 and spent some of his early adult life in prison.
I would sleep down here. There used to be a row of benches.
He went on to help create the magazine after a friend spotted a similar scheme on the streets of New York. He's gone from sleeping on the streets to a member of the higher chamber of British Parliament, the House of Lords, which works to question and challenge governments. And he's on a mission.
We're going to teach you how to look after your money, stand on your own 2 feet, and become people who rise out of poverty, like I did.
Nowadays, and the big issue's gone global, from Australia to Mexico. Over the last couple of decades, it's come a long way from its humble beginnings. The first street newspaper launched in 1989. The Big Issue launched just 2 years later. There are now 110 street papers in 35 countries in 24 languages. The Big Issue scheme has helped over 300,000 people. 27,000 people earned an income from it in the last year, earning themselves over $31 million. 24 million street papers were sold globally in the last year, read by over 5 million people. The papers are committed to challenging inequality and social exclusion.
7, 8, 9, Stuart, innit? How many do you want, mate? 3.
Vendors buy the magazine and then sell it at a set amount that's higher than the price they pay. They get to keep all the profits.
I would say we've dealt with probably 10 million people over the years in the UK who bought the paper, and everyone's a social worker. You had all these kind of self-appointed social workers who say, oh, isn't it wonderful? And they'd talk to them, and then the homeless started to change because they said, I'm actually not just a piece of social rubbish. So they changed, the public changed, then the government woke up to it.
From a familiar sight on the streets to famous Big Issue sellers, the story of one vendor and his street cat named Bob even became a best-selling story. James Bowen was a young homeless busker selling the Big Issue when he met a stray ginger cat named Bob, both of whom have become something of a celebrity. The Big Issue is now an institution in Britain, with the public falling in love with it.
Really changed the way that I see the guys and the girls on the street. Now, once you engage with them about the big issue and you talk to them about who they are, then you discover they're just, you know, they're people just like you, except there's been circumstances in their lives that have changed.
I think it gives people dignity. They're not begging, they're providing a service and information. It's dignity.
It's also nice to know that your money's going towards the big issue, and I think it gives, as Anna says, the person a purpose and a way of connecting with the general public.
And the articles that they do are really, like, you know, globally important, and, you know, sometimes they're a bit political, sometimes they're, you know, just pop culture, and it's a bit fun.
Most countries don't have official figures on homelessness, but in England alone, a recent government estimate showed more than 4,000 people slept rough on any one night. Double the number there was half a decade ago. It's why now, as much as ever, the Big Issue and magazines like it are so important, proving invaluable in helping homeless men and women around the world get back on their feet. Sarah Firth reporting for Insight.
Well, more on this. I'm joined in the studio by Joe Cools. He's the project officer supporting the homeless initiatives at Muslim Aid UK. Joe, why do you think selling newspapers works so well?
I think it gives people that ownership. You know, a lot of people who are homeless, who might be sleeping on the street, a lot of people don't want to beg. They want to do something proactive to get themselves out of that situation. And I think also for people buying the newspaper, it helps them. People feel awkward about giving money. Do I give money? Don't I give money? Where does that go? Whereas if people buy the big issue, they're buying into the brand and they know what it's about.
So it works certainly in London, and that in turn was a copy of ideas coming out of the States, and as we heard, it's been replicated all around the world. It's an extraordinarily successful story, isn't it?
Yeah, especially when you're starting to think about digital media. A lot of us are reading newspapers online, and newspapers, you know, The Independent last year struggled. So especially in a sort of time where everyone's sort of consuming stuff online, the fact that people are still going and buying the big issue.
And in your experience, people who do a bit of selling of this to earn a few quid, a few coins, it really can be the start of a journey back to a more conventional lifestyle, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it gives people some confidence, and as well, it breaks down that stigma that most people have about homelessness. You know, most people, the only time you might come into someone who's sleeping rough is if you walk past them when they're sleeping rough on your way home after a night out, or when you get off the tube and, you know, someone's asking for some money. So it gives that confidence, and it just breaks down that barrier as well.
In a relatively wealthy country like the UK, why do people end up homeless, in your experience?
Loads of reasons. I mean, relationship breakdown, and then people lose where they're living, or it might go to their partner. When people come out of jail, quite often they won't have secure accommodation to go into. People losing jobs, and we're seeing, especially in London at the minute, people are struggling to pay rent. Wages aren't going up, but rent is. So something's got to happen, and people quite often, unfortunately, end up sleeping on the street.
And is that a reluctance to ask for help, to reach out and say, look, I really have reached rock bottom here, I've got nowhere to go? So people, rather than do that, will grab a sleeping bag and just crash in a doorway?
Sometimes. Sometimes I think that is, some people can be scared to ask for help, or they're sometimes a bit too proud. But also in England and Wales, you've sort of seen a situation where councils haven't been necessarily obliged to help. I know through Parliament they were putting through the Homelessness Reduction Bill, and that was to change how councils dealt with homelessness. So it used to be that the council in England only had to help you when you was already on the street, and for that you had to be vulnerable as well. So if you're a single male out on the street, quite often you wouldn't get that help.
You don't meet the criteria.
No, you don't meet the criteria. But now that bill has been passed through Parliament, or is ongoing, the idea being that you can go to the council at any point and say, I am at risk of being homeless, can you help me?
But often they won't have any means of helping, will they? Because,
no.
I mean, these services are an absolute stretch.
Yeah.
To what extent does alcohol abuse or misuse and drug problems with drugs and management of drugs, does that play into this story too?
A little bit. I mean, but it's not the be-all and end-all of homelessness. I mean, that whole stigma around being homeless, there is a lot of they're alcoholics, they're drug users, but if I was sleeping out on the street, I'd probably be a drinker as well. Look at the weather today, it's horrible. How would you get through that on a day today? You know, and there is issues around drugs and alcohol, but they're not there because people choose to be there. It's a coping strategy quite often.
How much trust is involved in the organisation? And let's take the big issue here in London, or in the United Kingdom, I should say, as an example. You have an asset in the stack of newspapers. Often councils are required to wear official sort of jacket or something with a logo on it, won't it, to make sure you're not just somebody pulling a trick. But how trusting is it that the organisation does get some of the money raised through the selling of that paper?
I think it's good. I mean, and it buys the trust public into the whole brand and whole organisation. And I think without that trust, the whole mechanism falls down, because people won't be buying into it. They won't be buying the magazine.
Yes.
Because it's why for some reasons people don't give money to people who.
But every
are
vendor
begging.
surely doesn't unfailingly hand over all the gains from this newspaper, or how do they secure the loop that they're trustworthy? Mm-hmm. They've raised a bit of money this time, they can have another stack of newspapers and go and do it again. How do you establish that trust with somebody who's in a very vulnerable position?
Yep. So trust works both ways, doesn't it? So, I mean, the big issue have their own sort of safeguards and stuff in place, and I don't know them specifically, but I would imagine it's like with most other organisations and most other franchises, where if you're an employee of someone, your boss, whoever, is going to know what you should be bringing back. And if you don't bring that back, then questions will be asked, just like any other sort of organisation or franchise model.
So that it works on that basis. And in your experience with your particular help and the homelessness issue, is it the case that there just aren't the buildings, there aren't the people, there aren't the staff, if you like, to help people who find themselves in these predicaments?
Yeah, so you see things like, we've already briefly spoke about councils not having resources to help people, things like social and affordable housing. There's big issues around people who are on benefits not being able to get accommodation, because a lot of private landlords won't take people who are on benefits. Not all landlords, some will, but that is an ongoing issue. And also getting into hostels. Hostel places are limited, and quite often you have to go through a process to get there. And again, we're looking at hostels who are having their budgets cut, or they're in an increasingly competitive situation.
All right, Joe, thank you very much indeed for your contribution today. Joe Coles there from Muslim Aid UK. You're watching Insight. Coming next, how parts of your body could be the key to your financial security.